Hi, I'm Susanna. This is my November reading wrap-up and December hopefuls. I finished 4 books in November. Let's start with the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. I read the first 2 books, Shadow and Bone and Seeds and Storm. These are young adult fantasy. In the war-torn nation of Ravka, 17-year-old Alina Starkov's regiment is assigned to cross over the Shadowfold, a barren wasteland of unnatural darkness and monsters. When her best friend Mal gets hurt in a monster attack, Alina reveals a dormant power that saves their lives and leads Alina to join the forces of the Grisha, her country's magical military elite, and their notorious leader, the Darkling. So Shadow and Bone is the first book in a young adult fantasy trilogy that is part of Leigh Bardugo's Grishaverse books. I had heard a lot of praise for her series and I was eager to start with this trilogy. I understand where the praise comes from, although I must admit that this particular book did not quite meet my expectations. The number one reason for my disappointment is the number of young adult cliches in this book. The main character, Alina, is a plain-looking yet sassy young girl who suddenly gains a superpower that can save the world. All the boys are handsome and fall in love with her, leading to the inevitable love triangle. There's a makeover scene where the mousy main character gets prettified and a ball with princess dresses. All of these things are standard fare in young adult books and I found them frankly boring. I'm not 100% sure what I think about Alina. On the one hand, I did enjoy reading about her life and experiences. On the other hand, she was a bit too whiny damsel in distress and at times her sassiness didn't make any sense. There were times when her sassiness simply came off as stupidity. I'm also not sure how I feel about the love interests. I'm not a fan of bad boys, so I didn't understand why Alina found the Darkling so fascinating. Mal, on the other hand, we saw so little that he didn't really have time to grow on me. First, he's after every girl he meets with no apparent regard for Alina, but then he has a sudden off-stage realization that he's in love with her. The love triangle between Alina, Mal and the Darkling seems at the end of this book to be solved in favor of Mal, but I'm afraid it might not stay that way, which is a shame because love triangles are my least favorite trope. Another problem was Alina's sudden change at the midpoint where she learned to use her powers really fast. I would have preferred it if the development had been more gradual. I also wasn't a fan of the magic makes you pretty storyline, and you could make a drinking game out of how many adjectives Bardugo uses to describe grey eyes. I've read from other reviews that the Russian-inspired world building has mistakes, but as someone who is not well versed in Russian language and culture, I did not find those mistakes jarring. To me, the most glaring mistake was that they go hunting for this mythical deer creature to cut off its antlers in the spring. Okay, so maybe the mythical deer creature does not shed its antlers in the winter, but it still sounded like a mistake to me. Other than that, the world building with its magic system was interesting and one of the best parts in the book. Despite all the grievances I have for this book, I'm giving it 4.5 stars. I enjoyed the world building and this has a potential to develop into a great series. The next book I finished was the second book in Shadow and Bone trilogy, Seeds and Storm. The sun summoner Alina Starkov is on the run from the Darkling, but she and her best friend Mal can't outrun her destiny for long. With the help of a notorious privateer, she returns to Ravka, determined to lead the Grisha army to a fight against Ravka's enemies. This was a weird read because on the one hand it was better than Shadow and Bone and at the same time it wasn't. Let me try to explain. What I liked the best was the character development that I had hoped would have happened already in the first book. Alina is now more in control and not simply pushed around by other characters. There is also political intrigue that is actually interesting between the heirs to the throne. Then comes the bad. All the boys are still falling for Alina. There's now 2 more of them in addition to previous books Mal and the Darkling. Then there are the inevitable relationship problems between Mal and Alina because Mal is insecure and Alina refuses to tell him what's going on with her. I wanted to root for their relationship, but it was really difficult when they both acted like idiots. As Alina grapples with her power, the book becomes darker. That isn't necessarily my favorite thing, but on the other hand, I wish the book had explored her darkness more. I know this is a young adult book, but I think that an exploration of darker themes would have made this book more interesting. The novel shies away from getting as dark as it could have. And lastly, I found that the pacing was a bit off. The beginning was action-packed, but then the story stagnated into a very muddy middle where nothing important happened. The last 40 pages were again action-packed and get bonus points for taking a direction that I totally could not see. In short, this book has high stakes, but between the beginning and the ending, nothing important happens. Maybe this series would have worked better as a duology. I don't know, we'll see what I think after I finish Ruin and Rising. Anyway, I'm giving this book 4.5 stars as well. The third book I finished in November is a Korean historical fiction, The Court Dancer by Kyung-sook Shin. The novel tells the story of Yi Jin, an orphan who becomes a dancer in the Korean court in the late 19th century, just as Korea is opening to the world. French diplomat Victor Calin de Plancy falls in love with her and gets a permission from the king to take her with him to France. In Belle Epoque Paris, Yi Jin lives a free life away from the gilded cage of the court, but even in this new world, sorrows await her. I didn't know a lot about Korean history before starting this book, and it was an intriguing read. I wasn't a huge fan of the writing style though. It felt very list-like, and the constant jumps back and forth in time made the order of the events sometimes difficult to understand. Once I got used to the writing style, the book became better, but it's not my favorite historical fiction. I'm only giving this book 3 stars, but I would recommend this to people who enjoy historical fiction and want to learn more about Korean history. If you liked Memoirs of a Geisha, you will probably enjoy this as well. The last book I finished in November is a Finnish non-fiction book, Sinut on nähty by Anu Silverberg. I guess you could call this an autobiographical essay on gender and gays. There are also 2 books I started to read in November but did not have time to finish. The first is my old high school Finnish book, which I did not read cover to cover when I was in school, so I think it's finally time to read this. The second book I'm in the middle of is It Was the Best of Sentences, It Was the Worst of Sentences by June Casagrande. This is a hilarious English grammar and writing guide. I'm really enjoying this and I hope it will help me with the line edits of Project Prehistory. There's 6 or 7 other books I want to finish in December. Let's start with these 4. The first is the last book in Shadow and Bone trilogy, Ruin and Rising. The 3 others are non-fiction. The first is a guidebook to birds in Finland and Europe. The next is National Geographic's City Guide to Paris, France, Walking Paris. And finally, Editing Fiction at Sentence Level by Louise Hornby. This is another writing guide that will hopefully help me with the line edits of Project Prehistory. The last 2 or 3 books I don't have on my bookshelf. I'm going to visit my mother during the Christmas break and I'm hoping to read 2 or 3 books from her bookshelf. Let me know in the comments what was the best book you read in November and I'll see you in my next video.